Okay. So, to refresh everyone's memory, under the Federal Clean Water Act, the city is required to require projects of an acre or more in size to treat 85% of the stormwater that falls on them, removing pollutants before the water enters the storm drain. To figure out how to do this in a dense urban environment, the city and the U.S. EPA hired CD&A, Nelson Nygaard, and Phil Williams to prepare stormwater guidelines for green dense redevelopment. After the study session on the earlier draft, staff sent the draft guidelines to several developers and agency people. One response was from stopwaste.org, also known as Alameda County Waste Management Authority. They proposed some changes to Chapter 7, which is the instructions for designing sites and using the worksheet, and those changes have been incorporated into the guidelines that are in your packet. The second response was from Chiron. Chiron representatives met with staff and have prepared a letter, which is in front of you. And Chiron's comments point out some ways in which the guidelines can be clarified, and we appreciate their comments, and we also appreciate that they gave us the letter before the meeting. Chiron's comments focused on mechanical filters and amendments to approved projects and phased projects. The first two comments are about whether the city would allow mechanical treatment. The regional board has stated that some types of mechanical treatment are not acceptable alone because they don't remove enough pollutants and because they are not very visible and tend to be forgotten and not maintained. There are some filters that remove almost as many pollutants as vegetative solutions, but the problem of maintenance remains, and I think this is a policy question. I think the city prefers vegetative solutions because of their aesthetic and air quality value. Peter Schultz-Allen and I met yesterday with Janet O'Hara at the regional board, and we just about the guidelines in general, starting to try to implement this. And she stated that developers need to hire a drainage consultant to show them what they can do. For example, it is possible to treat a high water volume than you'd think in a planter. It doesn't have to be spread out like in a swale. A green roof can be separated from air intake by having the intake at a different place from the roof, like on the side of the building. Roof access can be made easy by installing, by putting flats on top of the roof that you can just lift up that have the plants in them. So there are a lot of options for how to do this. Staff recommends that the guidelines state that the city requires a vegetative solution unless the applicant demonstrates that it's cost prohibitive or otherwise infeasible. And it could be that in some special cases some of the treatment is in planter boxes and so forth, and some is in a mechanical filter. So I think that's one of their big issues. The third comment is about amendments to the approved final development. Chiron has a final development plan for a building, and they are considering amending it, making some changes to it, and they're arguing that that shouldn't open things up to new requirements. The regional board, Peter, it's either the regional board or the county stormwater program, has stated that an application that is deemed complete is, if an application has to come back to the planning commission or the council for changes, then it's opened up again. That's not something we can decide. We didn't realize that when we were meeting with them, but we've sort of looked that up since then. So that's not something we can really change. The fourth comment is about credit for landscaping provided before or after a building in a phased project. Although CD&A did do an example design on some pretty big complex projects in the process of figuring out how to use these methods, they didn't really address the issue of timing. And when you have a plan that's over 30 years and you have a park that's going in first and then a park that's going in later and a building's in between, how does that all fit? So my response to that is, well, there's two different things. One is that landscaping does not in itself equal stormwater treatment. Landscaping provides an opportunity to put in stormwater treatment measures. So if you have a park that there's the question of, do we want this on public property? Do we want this in the parks? It's also a question of design and program. So we can't answer a question about a project tonight, but there are various factors to consider, but an open space does provide an opportunity for a stormwater treatment measure, such as a lowered planter strip or something. So in that sense, they can use that for that. And in terms of phasing, taking a campus-wide approach is a good thing, but each building's runoff has to be treated as soon as it's completed. That's not something the city controls. It's something like the city's parking requirement. Chiron built a big parking garage so that their parking requirement would be met before they built the next couple of buildings. So if they want to build a big treatment feature that will treat all the runoff from their whole campus and then build the buildings that will run off into it, that's fine. But of course, I don't think that's quite what they have in mind. So they might want to speak on this item. But I'll conclude by saying that there are two next steps. One is a guidelines adoption hearing at the October 4th City Council meeting, and the other is a zoning ordinance amendment, part of a larger zoning ordinance amendment that Peter and I are doing to implement C3 that would require vegetative solutions unless the applicant demonstrates that it's cost prohibitive or otherwise feasible. So I would like your feedback on whether to do that or not. So I can answer any questions, and that concludes my report.
Yeah, I have, I guess, the one question, and unfortunately we didn't get to, well, anyway, on page 3 of the guidelines, there's a statement on the next to last paragraph on the right side. These guidelines serve as one part of the City of Emeryville's compliance with the requirements associated with the joint NPDES permits. And then these guidelines call for the use of the types of solutions listed and described in Chapter 6 rather than mechanical or box solutions. So that, from my viewpoint, is that saying that we can only utilize the protocols in Chapter 6 to be in compliance?
Well, I guess what I'm doing now is proposing a replacement for that sentence.
I'm sorry?
I guess what I was just doing is proposing a replacement for that sentence.
Oh, okay.
I think in terms of, you know, these are guidelines, and so each project is going to have to be evaluated on its own to see what's appropriate for that project. But there's been a number of issues with the mechanical filters. One requirement is that the city has an operations and maintenance, has a requirement to inspect all stormwater controls that are put on property, and the property owner has to enter into a stormwater agreement, maintenance and operations and maintenance agreement with the city. That was added to our zoning ordinance last year. And just the administrative burden on the city in terms of if every new project's going to put in a mechanical filter, just that administrative burden on the city in terms of monitoring that's one reason why it would be discouraged. The other is that the vegetative solutions have been shown to be more effective than the mechanical filters. And then the other is that you putting in landscaping into a project anyway is a requirement of our code, so making that landscaping work and getting a greener project. So the idea is that the guidelines should express a preference, and city policy should express a clear preference for a vegetative solution, but there needs to be recognition that it's not going to be appropriate for all projects. So if it's cost prohibitive or it's otherwise demonstrated to be infeasible, then a mechanical solution should be considered in conjunction with that.
Okay, I guess my question is that sentence inaccurate then?
I think that this sentence will have to be worked on to reflect the policy choice we're presenting to you.
All right, because to me that was black and white, you know, that we didn't have an option, but you're saying that that's not true.
Well, I think, and I think it's another reason that Chiron came to us. We had a meeting a very large meeting 2 days ago, and one of their concerns, which we actually really appreciate because we haven't gotten feedback from any of the developers, and these stormwater guidelines are something that everybody's going to have to grapple with, and they're pretty significant. And that one of their comments is that they don't feel that this guideline is clear that these are the preferred that these are preferences, but they're not requirements. And so their comment is that that should be clarified within these guidelines.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. With that, we'll open up the public hearing. Are there any folks in the audience that wish to comment on this item?
I think Chiron is going to, right?
Hi, I'm Jerry Hookwater from Chiron, and I think that Diana and Carol did a good job in describing what our comments are here. But we do appreciate the chance, the opportunity to comment on the guidelines. We're supportive of adopting guidelines such as these for the Emeryville area here. We feel like we have already implemented a lot of the items that are already in the front part of the guidelines. It talks about structured parking. We have done some structured parking already. We talk about the transportation management plan. We have one in place to keep some of the cars off the road. We have shuttles that we use between the buildings. We encourage bicycle usage. We have storage for those. We have changing room showers for individuals that do wish to use bicycles. We've done a lot of landscaping around the area. For those of you that remember, before we built the first building, it was a PG&E yard, impermeable, all the stormwater went down the drain at that point. So we have added a lot of landscaping already. And in doing so, I think that we did it properly with the street trees and the proper foundations and so forth for those trees with the right drainage. And we are working with East Bay Mud on the recycled water plan. So we are planning on using recycled water for the irrigation as well as for our cooling towers. But that isn't available to us yet, but we are working with them and plan to do that.
Do you have purple piping installed at this point?
Pardon me?
Do you have purple piping installed at this point?
We do not.
You do not.
Do not. We are working with East Bay Mud on that to hook up to the existing sprinkler lines, but we do not have purple pipe hooked up to those, and so we're working with them on how do we get around that.
Okay.
To hook up to our cooling tower, we will be replacing the lines there, so that will be the purple pipe. So, and we plan to run the purple pipe down Chiron Way to get access to our buildings. Okay. However, in going through the guidelines, again, Diana and Carol have done a good job in summarizing our comments. One is it wasn't clear to us that they are guidelines or how we get approval. Do we work with the with the planning commission to get approval? Do we work with the staff? Do we work with who do we work with and how do we get approval? And also, in working our way through the guidelines, there are a lot of nice things to do, a lot of the ones that I'd already mentioned. And then there's a spreadsheet that talks about how you, calculate the runoff and how much water you need to contain. And in the spreadsheet, it basically talks about the different biological treatment technologies that are there. To your point, Mr. Lutz, it didn't really seem to allow the mechanical solutions. There are different kinds of mechanical solutions out there. We're not experts in that area for sure. We're trying to work our way through this and understand how this would impact us or how we would comply with this. But the thing that we have done in the parking structure is we did put a sand oil separator in the parking structure. That was kind of the state of the art at the time when we built the structure. Today, that's probably not the right technology for this. If you look at the attachment from the Regional Water Board, it talks about some of those as not being recommended. But then later on, if you go to page 3 in the middle, it talks about, fortunately, there are other controls available. There they talk about the lands.
Excuse me, I don't think the commissioners have that.
Oh,
'Cause
oh,
it
I'm sorry.
No, we
didn't get
don't.
from where it hit City Hall to me.
Oh, okay, all right. Let's see, we can.
Describe it.
Okay, I will go through that. Because it does talk about how, there are filtration methods that they do not recommend, mechanical filters that they do not recommend. But then they do talk about the landscape-based controls being a good solution. And then in the same sentence, it also says, and a series of manufactured controls which are available today, which weren't available previously. It says, with few exceptions, these controls appear to function more readily and remove pollutants, and thus would be better represented MEP. So I think we need to be careful when we're talking about these manufactured technologies that are out there. And I agree with Carol, there has to be some way that you can monitor us, or we are monitoring to make sure that we do the proper maintenance on these. But it is something that we think that we really need to have approved. So if we need to go through and do the analysis first on the biologics, we could probably do that. But I think without some kind of manufactured technology available to us, with the way the development has been approved today with the new buildings, and if we built all that out, I really don't think that we could achieve meeting these guidelines just with the biologic solutions. I really don't think we can. It's an urban area, fairly dense area. We have a fair amount of landscape along Hollis Street now, but if you look at the build out, there isn't a lot more opportunities for landscape for us in those areas. So I'm not quite sure, and we don't know how we would do it at this point, but that's why we are raising this concern, and hopefully that we could get this change. And then Carol talked about, and Diana talked about the multi-phase projects. Some of the projects, the ones early on, we had a lot of landscape that was put in with the project, so we have opportunities to do some of this. But then over time, some of the landscape comes out when we put in a different building, which is all in accordance with the development plan. And then some of the buildings that we would build, it's probably just a building, and there probably isn't any landscape associated with that particular building. So it would be very difficult to achieve this on a building-by-building basis. And what we're looking for is some kind of flexibility, just like we have on the parking, that it needs to be a long-range plan and how we can accommodate this. The other thing about the being a biologics company, we have very technical buildings and very expensive buildings. And some of the buildings, we need to get FDA approval in some of the areas. For us to put greenery up on the roof is probably a non-starter for us. I just don't know how we would do it. We haven't talked with the FDA on it. It's very difficult to get that type of approval from the FDA. It just in talking with them to say, well, in principle, it's okay. It's not like coming in and presenting something to the Planning Commission, and in principle, we say yes, and then we go off and do it. So it's a very technical building, very expensive building, a lot of different HVAC systems within the building. I'm not sure how we would ever put greenery on the roof of that building. So with that, I'm not sure that we have more to say, just that we're happy that we had a chance to review this and comment on this prior to its approval.
Carol, couldn't some of the concerns that Chiron just presented to us, couldn't that be worked through with their stormwater pollution prevention plan? That I would imagine that they're going to have to update for their, over time they'll need to update for their campus. And wouldn't that be the appropriate place to consider some of these alternatives given the special circumstances that Chiron has to deal with because of what they do, and not try to change the guidelines, but just clarify what's going to be required of Chiron through the SWIP?
Yes. The bottom line is yes, that either through their stormwater prevention plan, I think that's what that stands for, or through pollution prevention plan, or through if this comes back to the Planning Commission or the City Council for an amendment to their FDP, then we'll have to address it at that time. I think the main comment, and I think to a certain extent that staff agrees with them, that there should be, we agree with them, but we do think that there should be a strong preference for the vegetative solutions. I don't know if they completely agree with that strong preference, but I think that's how the guidelines should be amended to express and to say that mechanical solutions can only be considered if vegetative is either cost prohibitive, or these other solutions are cost prohibitive or infeasible. And I would imagine that, the inability to get an FDA certification for your building would make it infeasible if that were the case. But that there be some findings before you look at the mechanical, because the mechanicals aren't as good of a fix. They don't green the city like the landscape solutions do, and then they also place that tremendous maintenance. They're only as good as their maintenance, and they put a tremendous maintenance burden on both the city and on the company or the developer.
I imagine they also use more energy, and potentially in driving that energy, increase pollution.
I think that they actually are energized through a gravity.
Oh,
It's
okay.
Well,
through the water. It's the water filtering through
Okay.
But if trash gets in it, they become less effective. That type of thing. So it's all about the maintenance. The other issue that's going to be coming to the Planning Commission is when we're making these recommendations for zoning changes, is that, as you'll see from these guidelines, that these new stormwater measures, which do, it's a lot of water that needs to be treated. It's very different from what's happened in the past. It is really going to be affecting the design of the projects that come before the Planning Commission. And we have to, at the planning stage, have to have some indication of where these stormwater treatment controls are going to be and what they're going to look like. Simply for reasons that we have to inspect them, so that, we can't have them between two residences in a condo development. It's going to have to be in a common area, or it might be a cistern on a building, which has design implications that the Planning Commission is going to have to approve. So we'll probably be moving in a direction where part of what the Planning Commission will be looking at as part of design review and a condition of approval is the stormwater treatment plan. And so you'll have an understanding whether the landscaping is a treatment measure and whether there's going to be planter boxes. Well, obviously, if there's a green roof, that's something that will have to be approved by the Planning Commission.
I guess the question I have is one of scope in terms of this development. In a lot of ways, we have parking variances that are mitigated various ways. And Chiron brings up a good point about developing a park and putting in the tree-lined street and everything else. I think that's something that, needs to be taken a look at. But outside of that, I think the guidelines do need to be changed in that one specific paragraph that we talked about, and to indicate that there is a preference in the city of Emeryville for vegetative solutions wherever possible, and that findings must be made to go to mechanical solutions that are acceptable to East Bay mud or something like that, right? So you're making sure that we steer them to the correct mechanical, but giving them, and I'm sure Chiron will try and take a look at the vegetative solutions as best they can and implement maybe some that in some areas. But, again, in this case, you definitely don't want to knock that out. And the second thing is, you had mentioned something about the city's need to monitor this. Is that somewhere here?
That's that's actually in the permit that a city is required to make sure that the stormwater treatment controls are maintained. And last year, our zoning ordinance was amended. Actually, it wasn't our zoning ordinance, it was our stormwater ordinance was amended to require all developers who have stormwater treatment controls to enter into an operations and maintenance agreement with the city. And in fact, we just executed our first agreement with the Volvo site. They're putting in a vegetative swale on their site.
So that's something that Chiron you'll have to work with Chiron on?
To the extent they have stormwater treatment control measures, yes, they'll have to enter into an agreement with the city. And it gets recorded against the property and allows us the right to enter the property to inspect, and also the mosquito abatement control district to also enter the property.
So that's something that you're going to have to work out with the city in terms of how they get in to check the controls and that kind of stuff, whether they be mechanical and stuff, right?
Is that something you think should be added to the guidelines?
Well, I don't know. I'm not.
Just a sentence of information so people know about that?
Yeah,
That's easy.
It can't hurt, that's for sure, you know. So, this is, I think in terms of, this is sort of, we're at a new frontier in terms of design
Exactly.
with this. It's really, I think you're going to start seeing some really interesting landscaping solutions because of these stormwater controls. And so the whole goal of these guidelines was that we get some really great solutions in response to the change in the law.
Yeah, and I think we'll get the full spectrum, and thank goodness we have developers like Chiron and people who will work with us and help us refine and tweak these things so that they work for everybody.
No, and again, it was great to have a developer call, because it really is. I think that Chiron was paying closer attention, but it's going to be affecting all of our developments, and it was nice to get the feedback on the guidelines.
Okay.
Yeah.
Carol, I think I'm going to close the public hearing since there doesn't appear to be any more
Yeah, sure.
people that want to comment. So we'll close the public hearing. Since we already brought it back to the commission, do we want to continue this discussion, or do we want to make a motion here?
Well, I think, Carol, you had some good suggestions to address, in part, Chiron's concerns, and my sense is most of those would be captured through the ordinance process. And but to the degree that maybe, Diana, you could acknowledge those in the guidelines themselves, I think that's appropriate. Did you want to, do we need to repeat that language that you had pulled together, Carol? It sounded
don't-
good to me when you read it.
Yeah, I think we know that basically that the guidelines express a preference for vegetative solutions, and that mechanical solutions can only be considered when it's been shown that the vegetative solutions are either cost prohibitive or infeasible.
And it's acceptable
And
through
findings
EBA
need to be
mode.
made.
Right. Well, the
Or
mechanical
whatever.
solutions would have to be approved by the city.
Right, okay.
Okay. Your
Making
motion?
sure that we have control over making sure
Okay,
that's...
so as restated and amended, I'd move approval.
I second.
Can I just make there was one small other change to the guidelines, and before you approve it, on page 3, where the paragraph that starts with Group 2, and it says projects with planning commission approval, that's going to be changed to projects with planning approval. That, so it will be projects with planning approval that propose changes on or after August 15, 2006, requiring amendment or reapproval must comply with the hydraulic sizing design. And that same change actually would go up to and be made in the last sentence in Group 1 above that. So because not all of our projects go to Planning Commission, some of them are approved by the City Council, so that's the reason for that change. And there's one other just really small change, but on page 20, there's a reference to the city's tree protection ordinance, but our ordinance is actually called an urban forestry ordinance, so we're going to change that.
Cool.
Fine to me, and
Fine to me.
I would recapitulate my motion, and it sounds like we have a recapitulated second.
Commissioner Germain?
Aye.
Commissioner Kane?
Aye.
Commissioner Martin? Aye. Commissioner Owens? Aye. Commissioner Troiting?
Aye.
Vice Chair Lutz?
Aye.
Chair Jeffrey?
Aye.
Motion passes.
Let's take a 5-minute break, and we can get set up for any study sessions if there is a setup for the first one.
Yeah.